welcome to Death and All the Rest, where we talk about life, death, and everything in between. Today, we've got a really incredible guest joining us. This is Gianna Demedio Simon. And just to give you guys a little bit of an intro into Gianna, she's fascinating. She's a natural networker, worked with media outlets like Good Morning America, the New York Times, the Ellen Show, Time Magazine, and more during her more than 10-year career in public relations. She's hosted and produced 3 podcasts ranging in topics from motherhood to grief, and has been asked to speak on various stages and podcasts. Now, when she's not on a play date with one of her 2 toddlers or volunteering at Avow Hospice in Naples doing bereavement work, she can be found on Instagram collaborating on content with some of the beauty and fashion industry's top brands. She holds the controversial belief that grief does in fact get better in time, and that there can be light that is born out of the darkest times in our lives, which is beautiful. And we love to hear that. And Gianna has also just informed Chris and I that she is one of the people who is very, very comfortable on camera and on mic. So we're really glad to have somebody like that join us today. Gianna, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about my favorite thing, death.
Yes. This is like, you are speaking our language because we're on the same page.
For sure.
You have a remarkable background, and I mean, getting to hear that you work with hospice and you've done all these different things in podcasts and working, being on stage and having these conversations. This is incredible. You also shared with me prior to scheduling all of this that today, the day that we're recording this episode, is the 8th anniversary of your dad's death.
Yes. Yeah, I think we scheduled this like a month ago, and you had a couple dates open on the schedule, and I saw this May 22nd, and I was like, well, if that isn't a sign, I'm going to do it. Cause like, What a nice way to be able to spend it, just to kind of talk about him a little bit, but then also talk about the progress that I've made, because I feel I've tried to turn the anniversary into that in the last few years. It's been 8 years, and each year brings its own story. There have been some years that I can't get out of bed and have been really difficult for whatever reason it is that year. But I always try to use it as more of a measuring stick to say, where am I now with my grief? How far have I come? What do I still have to work on? What are some of the things in my life that are better and I didn't think they would ever be this happy or good because my father wasn't here. And, how can I prove myself wrong in those thoughts that I've held? So, what a cool opportunity to be able to talk with you guys today on this, prominent day in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. The measuring stick for where you're at and looking at your grief as not something to get over, but to use to support you in your own progress. I think that's an outlook that's not always the way that people look at it, but really, really healing, being able to look at it from a lens like that. And I mean, to your point, that you said, like, controversially, you hold the opinion that time does help. Like, I'd love to hear you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think I get it why people say, like, it never gets better, because it's always still that person. It's always still that huge loss in your life. Like I was dealing with it a little bit this year, where I was like, okay, I feel a little stupid still being sad. But then, the other side of my brain comes in and says, well, no, he's still your dad. Like, of course you're still going to be sad. It's not like he became just a distant friend in 8 years. Of course you're always going to mourn that person. But that grief doesn't follow me around every single day the way that it used to. It is not an ever-present force in my day-to-day life. It is not sitting on my chest like a cinder block every morning when I wake up. And I went through months and years where that was the case. So to be where I am now, I can say, yes, like, my grief doesn't hurt the way that it did.
Yeah.
So I think time has a lot to do with that. But then there are people that are like, no, it never gets better. It never gets easier. And I think that's such a damning thing to be able to say, because when people said that to me in the beginning, I truly felt I was going to feel the way that I did the day of the funeral for the rest of my life. And that is so terrifying for
Yeah.
somebody, like to say that to them. So no, like the grief itself, like the love for the person, the pain in missing them doesn't necessarily heal, so to speak, but like the amount that you feel that or the intensity in which you feel that certainly lessens. And I feel like, you know, Instagram is just a place where people have an incredible amount of opinion for no reason whatsoever. But people argue like crazy in comments about it never gets better. It never, time doesn't heal. Da, 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 da. So I'm like, I kind of just need to say it. I'm going to be the one, but like, I think that it does. I think it's been okay. I want people to know that are at the beginning of their journey. And I've tried to be very, very clear in that. Have you guys ever heard of the ball in the box theory?
Yeah. No.
Okay, so this is where I think it explains it pretty well. So if you have a shoebox and there's a button on the side of the shoebox on the inside, and that button is your grief or the pain, okay? And you have a really massive ball inside of the shoebox that is like your everyday life. So you're moving it like this in the beginning of your loss. That ball's going to hit up against that button constantly. So you're feeling pain, grief. Over time, that ball gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I say I date myself by saying this because all of a sudden it becomes like the Windows logo. You know, when it just like goes like moving around on the screen. And it may hit that button or it may not. For you may go days or months and it doesn't ever hit that one spot. That button is still the same, right? So it is still the same pain. It's still the same grief, but it's just not being pressed as often. So I love that analogy. I couldn't even tell you where I found that, but that's been one that has stuck with me pretty early on to try to convey that feeling and also just to be able to cling to it that, okay, this ball isn't going to be so massive down the road.
But you've taken action. It sounds like it's not just time. You've actually thought about this and processed and probably done research and looked into it. So maybe these people who are talking and like it never gets better, they didn't. They just held on to that feeling.
Sure.
Yeah.
Their ball didn't shrink.
I agree with that because I think you have to face a very scary thing to dive into it. And that's kind of where I know my story is a little different. That for me, in order to survive, like I had to face it head on. But it's definitely like I kind of have seen so much positive come out of me doing that I've said like I've continued to trudge through it because I think quite frankly, as I watched my father not, you know, like he didn't really deal with it and it did cause some issues in his life. And I kind of thought, all right, well, how can I make this a little different? So what started as like me just trying to survive, like I said, like I needed to find an answer. Like, do you ever, you know how like when a really awful tragedy will happen in the news, and I don't know if you guys are like this, but sometimes you just become like addicted to researching it.
Yeah.
And like, but why did this person do this? Or why did this horrible thing happen? And blah, blah, blah. It's like your brain needs to find some logical answer to it. And sometimes there isn't one, but like, that's just the process that the brain has to go through. That's kind of what I did. And then in the process of doing so, I started like accidentally helping people along the way. And every time I could put a Band-Aid on somebody else's grief, it was helping put a Band-Aid on mine. And I kind of just thought, you know, I don't want my father's death to be for nothing. You know, I want to be able to say, hey, I could make something from this. I've learned lessons and I'm able to share them with others along the way.
Yeah. And being able to see that in a way where you're saying like time helps, that is hopeful. And I think we need that after a loss too, right? Like that's significant and it's devastating. And so hearing you say that, and I think Chris is right that, you know, people grieve differently and you faced your grief head on. You were doing something about it. You were looking it in the eyes and you're like, I've got to acknowledge that this is happening. I've got to figure out how to work with you and you can, come and walk by my side, but you don't get to consume me. And people
Yes.
don't always handle grief that way. There is the avoidance to grief. And Chris and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, that the fact that we can shove things to the wayside. We're both clinical professionals, so this is the work that we do in our coaching and stuff. But like, we are always constantly trying to have people look at the things that are hard to look at, because that's how we grow and that's how we make progress. But that's where I think a big difference and something that you've done really incredibly for yourself is not take that experience away from yourself and that opportunity to do something really hard, and to just instead figure out a way to thrive. And like I said, walk with that grief next to you and let it inform what you're doing at this point, helping other people, lending that to other people and guiding other people through this process. We're all going to lose people along the way, and it's going to be hard. And I think that's, I like the hope in the way that you talk about it and the way that you've dealt with it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't right away. Like I was not like, okay, now I'm gonna like take this on and watch me do this so gracefully. Yeah, it took me being hospitalized to realize, okay, this is like gonna be a life altering thing if I don't sit and face this. So my dad passed obviously on May 22nd, and then 3-4 weeks later, not even, is Father's Day. And I had spent that month kind of in between. I had a stepmother and I had a grandmother who was 94 at the time. And I just made sure that they were okay. I was so concerned about them. I was so concerned about, how are they going to make it? What did they need? And once it got to Father's Day, I ran myself ragged. I went to like 3 different houses to be with them and other family, and just kind of console other people. That I got home and it hit me that I like, oh my God, I didn't see my dad today on this day that I would see him.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I'm never going to see him again. And it all came out. I mean, I couldn't breathe. Next thing you know, there's a stretcher being rolled into my apartment. And, that was kind of the wake up call. As my husband now always says, like, there's a reason why they tell you on an airplane to put your own oxygen mask on first before taking care of other people, because you need to take care of yourself. So from there, once I got out of the hospital, I found a really good therapist. I've been with the same person for almost 8 years now. I recognize that is a very rare and lucky story. The mental health system is not the best, unfortunately, but I will sing therapy and antidepressant praises for, from the rooftops. But it took a while. It took, whether it was the therapy or reading books. One of my favorites that I've gotten was Option B by Sheryl Sandberg. I think that was the first time that I understood this idea that she puts forth called post-traumatic growth, and understanding that something good could come out of tragedy and there could be growth in a situation like that. So it was like, as I kept kind of going down the path, I would find these little pebbles and start to turn them over. And then as I was going on, the pebbles got larger, and then there were boulders, and then I just kind of kept it going. So I don't, if somebody's listening thinking I'm not at a point where I want to be turning over boulders yet, like, don't worry, I didn't start that way. But what's important is to at least try. I mean, anybody that I counsel, that I speak to about grief, I say, you need to face it now, because it's going to find you no matter what.
Yep.
And you need to at least just give it some air, because otherwise it's going to cause a lot of problems. Bree, you mentioned something really good about like it walking beside you and kind of like giving it a face, giving it a name. One of the quotes that I really like is, I sat with anger long enough until she told me her name was grief. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really powerful one, because that is certainly how it manifests in a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. You're also talking about like you're hitting on the fact that grief and progress in general is not linear. We say that all the time, because there are still times now, 8 years later, that I'm sure you're bogged down by it, that it's hitting heavier than other days. And I think what you're doing, what you're bringing to this conversation is you're normalizing so much around it. You're normalizing that it's not all at once, that it feels better and then it feels worse. It's not boulders from the beginning, and you might not even feel like you want to pick up a boulder, right? That's just way too heavy. The pebbles are a good place to start. You're bringing nuance into this conversation that I think it's really important for people to hear, because grief is one of those things like death, and that's, this podcast's point. People don't always feel comfortable talking about, and American culture specifically rushes us a lot. There's a certain mourning period, and we feel like then people should be ready to move on. So people, when we're experiencing grief, we often feel like there's something wrong with us when it's still sitting heavy months later, years later, or these days pop up where the ball in the box has gotten big again for the day, or not big again. Actually, your reference point was great, where it just hit that button, right? It was just there. And I think that this is the most important thing that I want listeners to get to take away from what your messaging is like, this is all real and this is all going to happen, and it ebbs and flows, but it's normal and it's human, and the love was there. So the grief is there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, you said it right. It's normal and it's human. Yeah. And I think, again, this is why your podcast is so important, because we need to get that out there more and just normalize that a little bit. I'm not sure why there are two things that are guaranteed here in life, which is birth and death, but we're so much more ready to talk about birth than we are death. I don't know where down the line that became so taboo. Yeah. I know that there are some cultures where it's not, and it is a lot more woven into the everyday life, or just memorializing people is different than the way that we do it in the American culture. I think that we have a lot to learn from those, but I don't know where that kind of skipped. I kind of was a little hopeful in COVID. I think that COVID did a lot of good things for grief. It unfortunately, caused a lot of grief, but it gave the opportunity for the country to kind of have this collective grief. And I just remember there were so many kind of experts in the field that were like, hi, knock, knock. Yeah, that feeling you're having right now, that's called grief. Like, you miss your work, you miss your everyday life, you miss being able to see your family and your friends. Like, that this is a grief. Let's talk about the grieving process. Let's talk about what you can do to kind of process those feelings. So, now do you know what other people are going through? Now do you understand that? The other thing I think it did well was kind of blow up the standard funeral process. I think it's obviously devastating that a lot of people didn't necessarily get the opportunity to do a funeral, but also I felt it, again, in some religions, it's like quick whim bam boom, like do a service, get them in the ground, or wherever it is. But COVID was like, you know what, let's kind of sit back, let's plan it for another time, let's plan a memorial service. I think that has been a lot more common since then. So it kind of like had to break a little bit for things to have a new way of doing it. But I was a little hopeful that we would talk about death a little bit more since COVID. I think that we all kind of like went back out and then it just went back to the way things were. But I think social media, again, can be good for those kind of things to bring about conversations. It's not always on the forefront of everybody's For You page, but it's one of those things like when you start to talk about it, you see that there are a lot more people talking about it than you would think.
Yep. Yeah. And you're talking about, like, with COVID, it brought in this creativity that people had to have in order to mourn, and there was a lot of devastation around not getting to have the funerals the way that people are used to having funerals, but getting creative allowed people to connect with their loved ones and the loss of their loved ones in a way that we don't do a lot in American culture. And it's rare that we have an event collectively as an entire country where we're all going through the same thing. So I think that was huge. But you're right too, in that we quickly boxed that up and tucked it away after COVID was, not as big a thing anymore. And this is the trying to pull the box back out and have these conversations, because all of that is still present. It's just now it's back to the normal timeline of it's going to happen to all of us when it happens. We're going to lose people at different times and frequencies, but we're also going to experience that stuff.
Americans are
Mm-hmm.
very good at compartmentalizing things.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I liked how you
Yeah.
talked about loss in the sense of it's not just death. Loss
Mm-hmm.
and grief come in a lot of different forms. We
Mm-hmm.
need to grieve like loss in our own lives, loss of things that we wanted that we don't get to have or don't get to do with our lives. And there's grief in that
Mm-hmm.
too.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about divorce and how that in itself is a grief, or people that, you get older and relationships with parents change and they don't show up in your life the way that you want them to or the way that you thought they would. And, or, especially once you have your own kids and you realize like they are not the grandparent you thought they would be, that is a grief. Like you are mourning this thought of something. But to your point, Chris, yes. And there's so much grief, different levels of grief that can be involved in one loss in itself. So I say like you grieve the same person multiple ways and multiple different times throughout different milestones in your life. So my father died when I was 27 and I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I had all these milestones ahead of my life, and I've had to re-grieve him as those people that he would have been, right? So like I've had to grieve him as a father-in-law and watching him bond with my husband. I've had to grieve him as a grandfather and watch him be that person in my children's life. I've had to grieve him as a father to me when I'm in a different stage of my life, like I don't need him in the way that I did when I was in my early 20s. And I think of how like, God, I would love to be giving back to him, or, flying him down here to come visit us in Florida and all these things, and just not having those opportunities to do that have had to be its own grief. But I think where I've handled that well has been like I acknowledged that early on. I didn't. At first I was like, I just got to get through the wedding and then I'll be totally fine. And then like it came up again and it came up again. I was like, all right, so this is going to happen like throughout my life. This is never going to end. And then once I acknowledged that, then I'm like a little bit more prepared as it kind of whiplashes around each time. And it's funny, I'll have that conversation with people and they're like, I don't know why I'm just like missing my dad so much lately, or I'm missing my brother or my sister, whoever it is. And I'm like, well, you just had a baby. So that's certainly going to do it. Like this is a new milestone for you. And this is going to pull out a part of your heart that hasn't really been tugged yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know what those markers are now. If you're looking for that. So you can kind of like maybe see it coming. Do you have like a different feeling towards it? Like almost like it's good to feel that? Does that make sense? Like
Yes.
So.
And it's definitely gotten to the point where like, okay, this is good. If I can notice it head on, then we're going to prevent a lot of problem in like a week or so. Because, like I said, she's going to sit there as anger. And then I'm going to figure out, oh, your name's not anger, your name's grief. So my husband has been very good. We unfortunately went through both kind of a lot at the same time. My husband and I, we were dating. We moved in together on a Friday, and my dad had the heart attack on Wednesday. So it was certainly a different start to our life than we had anticipated. Yeah. But I have like, some weird spiritual thing in my mind there that God was like, okay, like she's now moving on into the next phase of her life, and it's safe for me to take her dad because she's going to be safe with this man now, and whatever, all these defense mechanisms we tell ourselves. But then within that year, my husband's mom was really sick with cancer. So we kind of sat on the edge of our seat for a year waiting to see what was going to happen with her. And then she subsequently passed. So we both went into a wedding without a parent. It was an incredibly emotional time for both sides of our family. I would like to say there was probably not one sober person at the wedding because everybody was just so ready to have something good to celebrate after what was an incredibly traumatic year. But we both had to go through that work together. And it's kind of the thing now. I feel like very confident there's really nothing that could take us down because we had to work so hard together. And we are kind of that lookout for the markers, like you said, Chris, to be like, hey, this thing is happening. You're kind of a little irritable. Can we take a second to just check in and make sure this is, and it's been really nice. It's been one of those things where like it was awful and I wish that never happened to us. But now, like, what a cool position to be in that we're almost like so equipped to handle it moving forward. And one thing I did want to mention is that like now we are passing it down to our children. History repeats itself. I know, Bree, I told you the story and we can talk about it if you want, how I found out later that my dad was the third in our family to die at the age of 63. And he very much made his grief apparent to me, which is strange. He was an Italian male. And if you know anything about them, they're just tough as nails. They don't show feelings. They don't show emotions. But my dad did. And I never met my grandfather because same thing. He died when my dad was young at the age of 63. And my dad was like maybe 30 at the time. And my weekends were spent going to the cemetery and my dad crying and my dad being very open about it. My dad sharing memories. And I remember saying to him one time, like, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I can't imagine what I would do if anything ever happened to you or mom. And he said, you would just go on. And I said, no, I couldn't. I would never. And he said, but you would have to. And that's what you would do. You would be strong enough to do it. And that has always stuck with me, So I do thank him, while I am pissed at him for leaving me at 63, I do thank him for the wisdom he imparted on me and kind of like taking that fear of death away and being like, no, you would just figure it out and it's okay. And you would, despite the fact that I look at it, I'm like, but you don't have any of this figured out because we're still sitting here and you're crying hysterically at a gravestone, But now my kids are very young. They're 2 and 4, but we don't care. I haven't shied away from that. We talked about them. We show them pictures. We say that they're in heaven. They live in the sky with the birdies. And my daughter is just really latched on to that. I mean, just as yesterday, we called somebody in the car ride home from school and they didn't answer. And she said, I wish we could call Pop-Up Gary now. I know that we can't because he doesn't have a phone, but I really wish they had phones in heaven. I'm like, I know, like that would be really sweet. And I said, but you know what I do have is I have voicemails that he used to leave me. Like, do you want to listen to those? Yeah. And I haven't listened to them in years. And she loved it. And we got home and we ended up just sitting in my driveway and going through all these voicemails I have saved from over 10 years ago from him. And she thought that was the coolest thing.
Wow.
That's a good story.
There's like a continuation. Nice. You're keeping your dad alive in that way with your kids who have never met him, right? It's based on how young you're talking about your kids are, and your dad's been gone 8 years.
Generational growth too.
Yeah.
I'm trying. I'm trying. Yeah. To kind of circle back to the thing about time too, and like how it does make grief get better. What has been my case has been these things that I've feared. Like, okay, I feared that my wedding would suck because he wouldn't be there, that like I wouldn't be able to enjoy my own wedding. I feared having kids because how could I possibly open myself to loving something else that could then be taken away from me the way that he was. I feared just becoming a grown woman and, doing anything else in life and having experiences that I couldn't counsel with him about. But as I've hit each of those points of my life and I've survived and I've done it the way that he told me I would, even though I didn't believe him, it's taken that fear away. And it's been like, okay, this is going to be all right. Okay, he's not here, but my kids are still kind of talking about him like he is. Mm-hmm. And so like this fear of like my kids are never going to know him. I don't get the joy of him experiencing my kids, sure. but I against another defense mechanism. Like I have to believe he's seeing it. I have to believe he's around. I have to, I'm almost of a belief that he met them before I did. And to see them start to grasp onto who he is and his memory and his legacy and can identify him in a picture, like that's alleviated so much grief in me. So that's goes back to that thing of like time really will reveal itself and will kind of heal parts of your grief that you didn't there wasn't any other solution to it but time.
Yeah.
Right.
At the risk of sounding really cliche, but like your dad left you some wonderful gifts, because like there's a couple of things.
Yeah.
He set a tone for you facing grief head on. I mean, it sounds like he didn't know exactly how to work through the grief the way that you've been working through your grief, but he was showing you, modeling that he was sad and that loss was heavy and how that was hitting. He was showing that. And there's that, and then he left you with this like, yeah, and one day I'll die and you'll go on. And, he left you with
Yeah.
these little things to keep you pushing forward.
Yeah. And I won't sugarcoat it. There were certainly a lot of negative lessons he also gave me.
Yeah.
I don't think he processed a lot of it in the right way. And he let anger sit there and be called anger. He let alcohol take control of a lot of it. He pushed a lot of people away in certain areas of his life.
Sure.
So, but even in doing that, like I watched it, and when I was confronted with my own grief, I was like, okay, I now see how easy it is to go down that path, and I now see why you kind of were involved in that behavior. And that's like the one road that I could take, or I can start turning over those pebbles and those boulders and trying to go the different route. So yes, he did give me some good bits of wisdom, but he also had some major F ups that made me see, okay, that's the other way this could go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I've also taken it on so heavy, because I feel like I've had to heal for 3 generations of my family that never did that work.
Yep.
Does that feel heavy?
It doesn't feel as heavy anymore. It did, and I think again it's because like some of that weight is being taken off of me through my kids. And I'm seeing them kind of like pick up pieces with me. And that just makes me feel like, okay, this is all worth it. If I can give my daughter a beautiful understanding of death, and if that's one person in this world that I can change to say like, this doesn't need to be a terrifying topic, maybe she'll be a guest on the podcast in 10 years. Then I feel
With
like
you.
it's been worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's awesome.
You had mentioned to me, Gianna, something that I think is really important, and I would hate to miss this conversation here, is the 3 generations in your family who died at 63. And then you said, though, for you, it created your own mission to not be a 4th generation who has the same fate. I want to hear, like, what does that mission look like, and how are you bringing it to fruition?
Yeah. So like I said, my dad kind of was the friendliest person ever, like was the first person at the bar and the last one to leave, and just so friendly and so funny and witty and a storyteller. And the people that came to the funeral that were like, I'm sorry, this is probably awkward for me to be here. I've only met him once, but he made me feel like I was his best friend. And I just had to come and pay my respects today. Like he was that type of person. But there was a dark side to him too. And the marriage between my parents didn't work out, and I look at it now and I'm like, I get it, because when you're in this horrible phase of grief and or just this depression and this anxiety and whatever it is that you're holding on to, yeah, it's gonna blow up in your face. And so I very much said, that's not gonna be me, because it could have. I saw how like I could have just retreated to not getting out of bed, not being friendly, not wanting to do anything, not wanting to amount to anything, and just lay there with my grief and my sadness and my depression, because that's the easy thing to do. And I just said, I don't want that. So that's how I've been fighting through this. You made me think of something else here that I wanted to point out. Oh, where it's gotten a little muddy, I would say, is I've tried to say, okay, again, I'm going to make my dad's death mean something. I'm going to go out and I'm going to live life and I'm going to experience it. And I'm going to make sure that I make the best of this. There's this mantra of like, tomorrow's never promised. So go and do it. And my husband and I are very much like that. We'll go to the event. We'll go to the trip. We'll do this. We'll do that. We're involved in like everything. We never slow down. And it's starting to catch up with us. I don't even want to say it's starting. I think it damn near caught up with us years ago, and we just don't know how to stop because this idea of tomorrow's not promised, we have to do it all now, has been literally put us in a chokehold for the last few years, to where recently, as recent as December, I started feeling horribly anxious about my career. You know, you mentioned very kindly in the beginning of the show, I had a 10-year career. I worked with all the national outlets. I mean, especially during COVID, I was the liaison between a hospital and the doctors and the media. So when people wanted to know, what is this disease? What's happening here? Like, I was the one setting up the interviews. I got what was like 40 years worth of a career in 2 because of how fast and how hard we were working. And then I stepped away from it and I had kids, and this is the life that I chose. This is what I wanted. But because of this tomorrow is never promised mantra, I all of a sudden felt scared. I was going to say scared to death, like literally. Like, what if I don't accomplish anything else? Like, what if I don't get more opportunities in my career? What if this was it? What if da. And like, who cares? I should be fine with that. I should be fine with what I had and you know, that I at least have these beautiful children and all this, and that I wasn't okay with it. And I found myself like clawing so hard at other like career opportunities around me just to try to make something of it, because I was literally acting like my life was going to end in a few months and I only had so much time to do it. And I had to really reset my brain and say, I know that we live by this, and that's really great when it's positive, but it's starting to become a negative. And maybe I can take a step back and say that like death isn't right around the corner from me. I mean, we certainly hope. And none of this is really going to be meaningful if I'm not present for it and if I'm not able to take it in. So it's been this like pendulum effect that I certainly didn't expect. Like, I like to say death has really helped me learn a lot of good lessons, but then it was like, oh, I can't prepare too much for death, you know? Like, I was trying too hard to squeeze too much in, and like that it like tipped over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you saw like the option in front of you of I could miss out on life and spend it in my bed doing nothing, and then kind of do the human thing that we often do of overcorrecting and then rushing too much to fit it all in, and then like not leaving enough for future life, not sitting and enjoying what's happening as it's happening. And I think this is great that you're speaking of trying to strike that balance of like, yes, this mindset of let's not put things off. Let's do the things we want to do. I love that. That's living with meaning. That's being intentional about what you want to get out of life, but in a way where you're tapering it and you're like, there's still life to live. And I want to be able to enjoy these things as they're happening and not just moving to the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing. And that's that really fine line that I think we all try to think about in our lives and what we're doing with it, because life comes fast and it goes fast. And making sure that being intentional about it. And it sounds like that's at the core of what you do is you're assessing and you're thinking about like, okay, what do I want to get out of this? And how does this feel? How is this resonating? And not letting yourself get lulled into complacency.
Yes. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with assessing. And I think that's something that you always have to kind of lend yourself to do, and to sit and say, what is this right now? What's happening here? And that is what I started to do. And I kind of was like, where do I want to go with my career? What, avenue should I take? And then as I kept unraveling, I got to the answer that was like, you shouldn't be doing anything right now. You need to sit still, you know, and it was a totally different response than I had thought I was going to get. But, you know, I think it's important to note this is year 8 in my grief journey, right? So like you're always learning, you're always going to be uncovering new things. But like you said, just being willing to check in with yourself and assess is where you're going to see success, I think.
Makes good sense. So there's a self-care component to all this.
Oh, totally. Yes.
Time for rest, exercise, good food, mental health.
Yeah. And like, you know what, if you need a grilled cheese and a funfetti cupcake every now and then, that's also important.
Not being, don't be rigid. We don't want rigidity.
Right.
We want consistency.
No.
Yeah. And that's, I think that what you're speaking to too, Gianna, is like taking care of yourself in the restorative ways and the productive ways, right? Like it's and doing both, because both of those things are self-care, and recognizing what you need in a moment rather than what you feel like you should be doing in a moment is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, you have to zoom out every now and then, which I feel I have to do often. Like I want to acknowledge that that's a really common human experience to say, like, I'm focusing on the wrong things and I don't know why. And I wish I could focus on this and that and the other thing. I mean, we say it all the time, like how much we wish we're more present, or we're not on our phone as much, or we're not doing whatever. Like, it's just kind of the way the human body is now. Like, I don't think we should put too much pressure on ourselves, but as long as we keep saying like, okay, am I really focusing on what's right now? I think that the more we make time for the important things in our lives, then the calmer and the happier we will feel. Like my husband does this activity with colleagues of like, if you could write your own obituary, and it's like today, like you died today and you're writing it, what would it say? And would you be happy with that? And not in a sense of like, I don't know why we put so much emphasis on what we've accomplished in a career, you know, like that, why that is what society sees you as. But like, would it say that you had great relationships around you? Would it say that you spent your time in, you know, in causes that meant that were near and dear to you? Would it say that you traveled and you did these things, or whatever it is that's important to you? And I think it's interesting to look at that, because you certainly can get lost in like, I need to do all these things now to get to this point in 5 years from now, or whatever. I do recognize, you know, there's a little bit of like privilege that's underlined there if you can have the freedom to be able to say, I need to step back on certain things. But just zooming out to look at your life and say, okay, am I making the best of it? Am I making the happiest choices for me? Yeah. And that's that self-care that you talked about.
Yeah, it's kind of my mantra.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gianna, too, you mentioned the dinner party thing that you're doing as part of like your current engagement, and tell us about it. Fill us in.
Yeah. So when I moved here to Naples, Florida, I found out about an organization called Avow, and it's a hospice center. They do, I think they have about 400 patients enrolled throughout Southwest Florida, but then they also have a hospice house on campus, and they have palliative and bereavement care on their campus. So once someone has passed through their facilities, they then kind of usher the family right into the bereavement care, which I think is a fabulous thing. And like, I feel like should be just for every hospital everywhere, and not just like within hospice services, but that's, you know, a whole other podcast episode. But so, and I started volunteering with them. I would sit there and week after week see their bereavement services only be accessed by like senior women. And not that they don't need the care, because they do. And then they have a whole other arm that is for children. Again, certainly important to get them their care. But as the co-founder of the dinner party says, the Carla Fernandez, she says there's kind of like this sandwich in the middle of millennials that people forget about or just aren't really getting the care. And what I've found in some of the work that I've done is like the teenage years are the ones that don't really think about it because yeah, their parent may have died, but then also they're worried if Rebecca's going to sit next to them tomorrow at lunch or Tyler's going to play with them on the playground. Where like the 20s, 30s, 40s are like out there in the thick of life trying to be human and process grief. So there's a severe need for services in those areas. And I felt, how cool would it be to be able to bring this to a vow where there's this already like fabulous umbrella of bereavement care. So the dinner party is a national organization. They've been highlighted by like the Washington Post and CBS. They are dinner parties, so to speak. So you can just kind of say, oh, I have a dinner party tonight. I'm going to a dinner party tonight. It was so people didn't feel like I'm going to my grief group or I'm going to my therapist. And you're among other people that have been through the same. And they're all types of grief. It could be something that happened 10 years ago. It could be a brother, a sister, a parent, fiance. And I just remember how transformative it was for me. I started going because a friend recommended it when my dad had passed after 6 months. And just being able to go in and feel like I could lay my weapons down for a little bit of being spending so much energy trying to dodge bombs in conversations of something that was going to make me cry or something that I was not going to know how to say or make someone feel awkward to be like, oh, you asked what my dad does for work. Well, he does nothing because he's dead. Like just being in a space where it was like accepted to just be sad and be griefy and kind of say those things was incredible. So I've kind of brought together a vow and the dinner party and how could we, bring these services to more people. So we recently teamed up with them and we're going to be offering services in the fall to have dinner parties at a vow in Southwest Florida. So I'm not sure if we have any information up on the website just yet, but people can certainly reach out to me on Instagram. I know you'll share the information there, or you can look at Avow's website. I think it's avowcares.com and start signing up for that. But regardless, wherever you're listening from, Avow does have virtual tables. Or I'm sorry, the dinner party does have virtual tables. So you can look at that and sign up for a virtual table too. It's a great organization.
Sounds like it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think we'll land it here. Gianna, it's been incredible to get to pick your brain and just hear your own process and your thoughts around all this stuff. Thank you for being willing to open up the conversation and have the conversation around death.
Yeah, thanks. Love talking about it. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. It's a ever evolving thing, and it's a great conversation to have. And again, thank you guys for having me, but also for talking about it. And you're doing great work. So thank you.
It was our pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming today to the Deaf and All the Rest podcast and visiting with us and our guest. It's been a pleasure. Have a good day.